How did you ever think? How did you ever think it wasn't bound to happen? You poison the waterfalls, set fire to our rivers of hope. The end of us all, well, it was always bound to happen. To happen. So sniffing cold, all the children are depressed, not the future we had hoped. Little girls aren't safe at home, she's scrolling up and down her phone. She hates her life, she hates herself, and she's 12 years old. These social apps are now our gods and dopamine from likes and shares, and we find peace from drugs and sex and prescription anxiety, man. The truth under the rug, feed us plastic gym and corpse. We don't need self-motivation, robots will take all our jobs. How did we ever think? How did we ever think it wasn't bound to happen? We poison the waterfalls and set fire to our rivers of hope. We're all gonna die, we do before it happens. It happens. Turn a blind eye when the drunk man falls. Did you ever think, why is the drunk man drunk? The system fails, 2 kids in jail, and the rich get rich and the rest get sung. Classist, sexist, racist, ableist, fascist, ageist, homophobic. Country leaders fucked our futures and they think we haven't noticed. Forests burning, oil spills, melting ice and methane gas, toxic waste and plastic fish. We're digging holes to hide our trash. Reaching all our songs, but we drew borders across our lands. 1,000 years we've been at war. When the planet is dead, we will all hold hands. How did we ever think? How did we ever think it wasn't bound to happen? We poison the waterfalls and set fire to our rivers of hope. We're all gonna die, we do before it happens. It happens.
I heard my name.
Attention citizens, please evacuate the country in an orderly fashion and leave behind any personal belongings and danger.
For sure. Stay here, don't leave. Oh, yeah. What are we doing?
How did you ever think? How did you ever think it wasn't bound to happen? You poison the waterfalls, set fire to our rivers of hope. The end of us all, well, it was always bound to happen. To happen. Sniffing cold, all the children are depressed, not the future we had hoped. Little girls aren't safe at home, she's scrolling up and down her phone. She hates her life, she hates herself, and she's 12 years old. These social apps are now our gods and dopamine from likes and shares, and we find peace
rich and the rest get sung. Classist, sexist, racist, ableist, fascist, ageist, homophobic. Country leaders fucked our futures and they think we haven't noticed. Forest burning, oil spills, melting ice and methane gas, toxic waste and plastic fish. We're digging holes to hide our trash. Reaching all our songs, but we drew borders across our lands. 1,000 years we've been at war. When the planet is dead, we will all hold hands. How did we ever think?
You have to make time.
How did we ever think it wasn't bound to happen? We poison the waterfalls and set fires to our rivers of hope. We're all gonna die. We do before it happens. It happens. Attention, citizens. Please evacuate the country in an orderly fashion and leave behind any personal belongings that you don't need. How did you ever think? How did you ever think it wasn't bound to happen? You poison the waterfalls, set fire to our rivers of hope. The end of us all, well, it was always bound to happen. To happen. Come on, kids, it's time to vote. Boris Johnson, Stephen Colt. All the children are depressed, not the future we had hoped. Little girls aren't safe at home. She's scrolling up and down her phone. She hates her life, she hates herself, and she's 12 years old. These social apps are now our goods and dopamine from likes and shares, and we find peace from drugs and sex and prescription anxiety. Man, the truth under the world, feed us plastic gym course.
That makes good sense.
Self-motivation robots will take
You can see
all
them?
our jobs. How did we ever think? How did we ever think it wasn't bound to happen? We poison the waterfalls and set fires to our rivers of hope. We're all gonna die. We do before it happens. It happens. Turn a blind eye when the drunk man falls. Did you ever think, why is a drunk man drunk? The system fails, 2 kids in jail, and the rich get rich and the rest get sung. Classist, sexist, racist, ableist, fascist, ageist, homophobic. Country leaders fucked our futures and they think we haven't noticed. Forest burning, oil spills, melting ice and methane gas, toxic waste and plastic fish. We're digging holes to hide our trash. Reaching all our songs, but we drew borders across our lands. 1,000 years we've been at war. When the planet is dead, we will all hold hands. How did we ever think? How did we ever think?
Welcome, everyone.
Wasn't bound to
Keep
happen?
milling about and making friends. You've got a little bit more time. We're just waiting another minute for
Poison the
some more
waterfalls,
Voyagers
set
to come into the
fires
room.
to our rivers of hope. We're all gonna die. We do before it happens. It happens. Attention, citizens. Please evacuate the country
All right. Thank you. Thank you to Carmen, who is handling the tech in the back. Everyone, welcome to the breakout session on climate change and mental health. We are so delighted that you have made time and space for us today in this incredibly busy Planetary Health Summit. My name is Britt Wray, and I will be your moderator today. Now, you might have noticed that there was a song playing in the background for a few minutes as people were gathering, trickling in. Not sure if you read any of the lyrics that were scrolling by on the screen, but that's a song called Environmental Anxiety by a British artist named Wray. And we chose to play this for you just as a tiny example of how many artistic explorations, musicals, operas, installations are now pouring out of our human family around the world to help us process the mental and emotional distresses and disturbances that so many of us have within us as we move through all of this planetary change. And so we've come together around this session today to explore exactly that nexus between human, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being and the climate and wider ecological crisis in which we are living. So this event today is co-organized by the Climate Mental Health Network, which is a US-based and focused group creating resources and programs modeled off of research with youth, educators, and parents, as well as the initiative that I lead in the School of Medicine at Stanford University, which is called Circle at Stanford Psychiatry, a research and action initiative focused on community-minded interventions for resilience, climate leadership, and emotional well-being. Can we please move to the agenda slide? Great. So as you can see here today, we're going to get into a lot of juicy, meaty topics together, including doing a brief overview of the climate mental health nexus. We're going to learn about a massively inspiring and ambitious research project to create a global community of practice for climate change and mental health, as well as a global research and action agenda to help cement the field in solutions that can go into the hands of policymakers and practitioners and funders. We're going to dive into some groundbreaking research and thought leadership from the Philippines about what climate anxiety looks like there for people on the ground today in a research field that is all too often occupied by global North voices. This is a critical global South perspective. And we're going to get into some incredibly creative and genre-defying ways of visualizing climate mental health data and promoting emotional and cognitive engagement with this field. So I hope that you are ready for all of these wonderful elaborations. And I'm joined today by a wonderful group of panelists. They're very dynamic. In order of appearance, we have Dr. Emma Lawrence, lead of the Climate Care Center at Imperial College London. We also have Dr. John Aruta, leader of the Sphere Lab at De La Salle University in the Philippines. And we have the incredibly creative dynamic duo, Pablo Suarez and Janot Mendler de Suarez from the Red Cross Red Climate Center. Pablo is joining us virtually. Carmen, just a thumbs up, hoping that Pablo is looped in, linked, and ready to this presentation. So I will bring on our first speaker in a moment, but first, let's advance the slide to tap into a quick exploration of how we are all feeling in the climate crisis today. So what you see here is a climate emotions wheel created by the Climate Mental Health Network based on the research of Panu Pikala, who's an eco-anxiety researcher who did a taxonomy of climate emotions, looking at what the literature has to tell us about how diverse peoples are feeling in relation to this crisis. And you'll see that it actually resembles the kind of emotions wheel that many therapists hang in their offices to help clients and patients identify their emotional experiences, which can otherwise be kind of occluded or blurry or difficult to disentangle. And so here we'd like to ask you to just take a couple minutes, please. Turn to the person next to you. If you have no one next to you, please sidle up to someone nearby in a row and use this tool and ask yourself, in any given week, what emotions feel salient to you from this wheel? Which ones do you resonate with when facing the climate and larger planetary health crisis? They might be the distressing emotions like anxiety, grief, sadness. They might be the positive and affirming emotions like hope and courage and motivation, or they might be seemingly contradictory buckets of emotions where all of them are slewed together. So please just go ahead and strike up a conversation. There's a lot of buzz in the room. That's a good sign. Take another minute. Make sure that you've each had a chance to share before we move on. Nothing gets a room's attention better than symbols. All right, thank you. Would anybody be willing to reflect back on what you and your partner discussed? What were some of the emotions that bubbled up that were shared? All of them? Someone just said that? See, that tracks for me too. That totally resonates. And did I hear something over here? Gratitude. Coming from gratitude. Beautiful. Any other accompanying emotions? Yes.
Of despair. How's this going to go? Thank you. It migrates, it vacillates between those feelings of optimism and positivity and news, or just sort of absorbing what's happening out there, going in the opposite direction. So I'd say those emotions are vacillating, kind of based on the day and what's out there in the news cycle.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It really beautifully illustrates how we contain multitudes. We can begin the week feeling awe, enchantment, wonder, sense of reverence for being here at all. And also, we are attached to a fire hose of bad news about the climate and wider environmental crisis, which can also make us visit pits of despair, crevices of fatalism, and scary thoughts. And we can hold both. We can learn how to toggle and practice contemplative gratitude. We already heard from one of our friends here today, to help us maintain a brightness of mind that allows us to also be with the suffering that is in our midst around this. Well, those were really spot on insights that everyone just shared there. And I hope that those online are also able to pop into the chat or write on a piece of paper what's coming up for them. So I'd now like to give us together just a brief bird's eye view of what we're learning at the intersection of climate change and mental health. So as people at this summit will know better than most, there's ample evidence to show that our health is now literally at the mercy of fossil fuels, right? The increased carbon dioxide levels, extreme weather events, and everything else that we understand, deadly extreme heat is increasing exposure to air quality issues, malnutrition, poor water, sanitation, spread of vector-borne diseases, chronic disease, allergens, and more. And the thing is that as we get physically sicker, our moods, our mental health tends to suffer as well, because who feels so hot emotionally when they are physically in rough shape, right? And so that's very much understandable. And what we need to therefore understand is that mental health is a cross-cutting outcome across all of these spanning physical health impacts that we are so worried about and focusing our attention on. And when we back up to see the multiple pathways by which climate change affects mental health, we know that there are direct and indirect stressors, things like hurricanes and floods and wildfires and the disruptions that these cause, to necessities like food and work and shelter. This can lead to clinical anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, domestic abuse, and even suicidality. And extreme heat, which is the deadliest of climate-linked disasters, is associated with self-harm and violence and aggression. We also know that the psychological impacts of disaster are thought to outweigh the physical impacts about 40-1, which is quite a whopping ratio. Then there's that well-understood bidirectional relationship between physical and mental health worsening, as already mentioned. And lastly, awareness, right? Because as is a surprise to no one, through our devices, we are connected to a constant barrage of bad news about the health of our planet. And this is stoking mental and emotional distress. The research shows us virtually everywhere. But we're not all equally vulnerable, of course. Some who are hit hardest and first include children and young people who face a very uncertain future and whose developmental immaturity makes them more susceptible to physical climate harms. Women who also face and experience more climate anxiety and antenatal distress around climate-related births, and can experience anxiety and depression when forced to migrate under the threat of sexual violence due to climate threats. We also have people on the front lines of disaster who are predominantly in lower middle income countries and across the global south, and anyone who has a difficult time evacuating quickly, which endangers people with mobility issues and the elderly. We also see people with pre-existing mental illness are more vulnerable. For instance, if you have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, you're 2 to 3 times more likely to die in a heat wave. And then anyone who is living with close and intimate relationships to landscapes that are changing, endangering farmers, outdoor workers, ranchers, and indigenous peoples worldwide. And another group that we don't often talk about are the frontline climate and planetary health professionals, those of us who are studiously bearing witness to the breakdown of our life support systems and care enough about these problems to devote our life to them, because that naturally brings a psychological toll rooted in love that manifests as pain and heartbreak sometimes. So it's important that we really pay attention with laser focus now to this rising epidemic that we can see of mental health challenges coming our way and that are also already here, because it isn't just that the state of our climate affects our mental health. It's also that the state of our mental health and well-being is critical to how effectively we can address these problems. Because if we are so battered socially, spiritually, emotionally, in terms of mental health, that we don't have a high enough functioning level to take on this transformative work that we know we must at this time and place, this auspicious moment in which we are living, well, then we won't have our cup full enough of the ingredients that are required to do that work. And so, yes, the climate crisis impacts mental health, but the mental health of all of us determines how bad the climate crisis will get. And we're dealing then with a vicious cycle. Fortunately, this is starting to be grasped and recognized at the highest levels. So at the UN's COP28, most recent conference, we see the mention of mental health in the first ever Climate and Health Declaration, which is great. And authorities like the WHO are publishing policy reports on the intersection of climate and mental health, but this is nowhere near enough for what is needed. Because with continued warming of the planet, if things do not drastically change, by 2070, 19% of the planet is expected to be uninhabitable for 1 to 3 billion people. And yet, according to the WHO, only 0.5% of all climate funding that exists goes towards health projects, and then mental health, which is a chronically underfunded area, makes up an even smaller subset of this support, which is very unnerving, given that we need massive investments to prevent this impaired functioning in society, right? The additional costs of mental disorders due to climate hazards and air pollution and lack of green space is estimated to be 47 billion by 2030, and then that balloons to a predicted 537 billion by 2050. So we have our work cut out for us. There's lots to do. And in order to understand what researchers around the world are now doing to collaborate transdisciplinarily with practitioners, with policymakers to help close those critical gaps and get us towards rapid solutions, I invite up Emma Lawrence to describe to us the Connecting Climate Minds project.
Thanks so much, Britt. And that was a perfect scene setting. You can see lots of cameras clicking as everyone's trying to take in all of that wonderful overview. So my name's Dr. Emma Lawrence. I lead the Climate Cares Centre at Imperial College London. And it's been my great privilege over the last year to work with the members of this panel and many others across the world on the Connecting Climate Minds Wellcome Funded Global Project. So Britt perfectly described this vicious cycle that currently exists between climate change and mental health. When we see the deep interconnections between these two global challenges and crises, we can also grasp that there is an opportunity at the heart of climate action to better our mental health and well-being, and that it is by investing in the resilience of communities and systems psychologically and socially, that we're going to be, as individuals, as communities, as organizations, institutions, in the best position to be able to cope with and act on the climate crisis. So there is this possibility to flip this vicious cycle to a virtuous one, where we get win-win opportunities to create a world that's better for our mental health and well-being as we take action for a safer climate. But this relies on a vision of that world and bringing people along with that vision, as we've heard so powerfully over the last couple of days, requires that we engage not just with facts, but also with feelings, with stories. And so, as Brian Eno said, a vision is needed for the world that it's worth fighting for. And to change minds, we need to change feelings. So when we're talking about the climate crisis and mental health, we're talking about a huge range of disciplines coming together to really understand all the way from our psychology, climate narratives, all the way up to how people living with severe mental illness might be affected by a changing climate. And that requires, a whole suite of disciplines to come together to both understand and respond to these issues. This field is rapidly growing, as Dr. Wray said, but it still remains disconnected, unequal, and siloed. The disciplines that we need to come together to understand and act on the interconnections between climate change and mental health are still not well connected, including between interventions and work already happening on the ground, or insights and knowledges that we know exist in, for example, Indigenous peoples and nations, and people already adapting to a changing climate around the world, with other organizations and communities that could stand to benefit a lot from this wisdom. It's hugely unequal. The vast majority of research that's published in climate and mental health to date has been done in the global north, despite the fact that it's global south countries that are being most affected. And it's also siloed. We heard this morning that this is a problem across planetary health in general. How do we create more joined up thinking in policy and practice? Next slide. So we fundamentally need connection. We need relational thinking, systems thinking in planetary health, including in climate and mental health. And this is what was really at the heart of Connecting Climate Minds. So we started out the year, sort of just over a year ago, with two main aims. The first was to set the agenda for this nascent but rapidly growing climate and mental health field so that people and investors coming into the space would know where to target their work. And this was to develop a research and action agenda that would be inclusive and that would be grounded in lived experience realities and targeted to where evidence could best support change in policy and practice. The second and very interconnected aim was to grow global and regional and lived experience communities of practice, so to bring and connect people together in this transdisciplinary way to create and enact that agenda. So we created 7 regional communities based on the Sustainable Development Goal regions. And we wanted to make these really transdisciplinary and bring together voices across what are very big regions. So they were created by having a regional community convener. John was actually one of them. Britt was also a co-convener, which we had across the regions. We had other co-conveners coming together from across different organizations and institutions. We then had a lived experience advisory group and youth ambassadors as part of this core team so that their insights and views would be really embedded in the work that was done. And then this kind of core team brought together voices from across disciplines and sectors, including expertise by lived experience from across the region. So these are the logos of some of the people that we worked with as those conveners and as partners, including the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Centre, who was part of the central global team. But this doesn't include all of the many, many people that worked on the project, but you can just see some of the reach. So across the last year, we've had 14 virtual regional dialogues. There were 2 in each of the 7 regions, each 3 hours long. The first was about understanding what are the emerging lived experience needs and how can we therefore target research to better understand and respond. The second was really about how do we do this research? How do we change fundamentally the way we conduct research in climate and mental health so we don't perpetuate some of the issues that we've already heard about over the last couple of days, and ensure that the evidence that already exists or is created translates into policy and practice and actually makes change on the ground. We also had 3 virtual and 4 in-person dialogues for young people, Indigenous peoples and nations, and small farmers and fisher people. And these were led by and with those communities. So, for example, Susti Vibes in Nigeria and Force of Nature led the youth work. Some of you might be familiar with them. The Climate Mental Health Network worked with an Indigenous advisory board to work with Indigenous peoples and nations. And also we worked with small farmers and fisher people from around the world and partner organizations on the Small Farmers and Fisher Peoples Dialogue. So we had altogether 870 participants from over 80 countries. And we created 10 regional and lived experience agendas. So this was to set what needs to happen in research and in action in each of those 7 regions. So it's really regionally and locally focused. And also for those communities that were chosen for, being particularly vulnerable, but also having unique insights and sources of resilience in the context of the climate crisis. And we also developed 25 case studies from around the world to really make sure we could be sharing what's already being done, what's already working, and 35 lived experience stories. So really courageous people from around the world who shared their experiences so others could really understand what this looks like for people already living with the climate crisis around the world. If we can play a video, this will show just a little snippet of some of those voices.
People are tired. People are frustrated. Environmental problems are at the low end of the priority list.
I could not sleep at night. I had anxiety attacks, I would say, because you're constantly worried. And also even at work, I was angry. because I'm like, there is no water.
In the capital of India, where, I mean, the last couple of years, the summer temperatures have regularly been crossing 50 degrees Celsius, which is actually unheard of. It's unnatural.
I think identity, indigenous identity is such a big part of our resilience. And when you take away the land and the forest that is that source of identity, that can lead to a lot of mental stresses as well.
We lived in a constant state of terror that it would spread. We were afraid to go outside. We had young kids.
Who you are, it is not defines you to be a change maker for a better future of yourself and your community.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to hopefully very briefly try and step through just an insight of how we took some of the voices that we heard through the project into the research priorities. So I'm going to focus on the three thematic agendas. So for youth, Indigenous peoples and nations, and small farmers and fisher peoples. And so this is just an example of some of the quotes that we heard. So this one comes from the youth dialogue. The victims of this negative climate impact are stressed mentally. Due to this stress, they cannot value their futures. They are disappointed about the futures and decided to do suicide. So the future is not bright. It is black rather than bright. And what we heard was that people were speaking about their experiences in lots of different ways across different cultures and different nations and different groups. So we need to understand how people talk about their mental health in the context of climate change. So the research priority that emerged was understanding language and terminology related to mental health and well-being that resonates with young populations who may experience climate-related events. This may include descriptions of personal experience, or labels such as eco-anxiety or solastalgia, which were used by some people and not others. An example from the farmers' dialogue: every season is different. The harvest is going down every year. They start cutting trees for charcoal as a coping strategy, but it makes it worse. A lot of depression, hopelessness, and a feeling of not knowing what to do. A lot of trauma. Many talk about suicide and fatigue from farming, connected to lack of sleep, body changes from depression. They isolate from their friends as not coping well. They cope using substances. So you can see there's a lot in that one quote about how people are being affected. And that was one of the categories we looked at, was the impacts, risks, and vulnerable groups, but also the different pathways by which people are being affected, the pathways and mechanisms that also really interacted. And that was another category of research question. And so this research priority falls under the impacts, but there's many others that we drew from this in pathways. So how is anxiety and stress for farmers affected by the ongoing and compounding experiences of the climate crisis? And at what point do these experiences become debilitating and impact personal, familial, and social functioning such that they constitute a mental health challenge? So finally, in this example from the Indigenous dialogue, when we are allowed to be Maori, we are allowed to be well. We are now starting to look to our culture for sustenance rather than the dominant world cultures, from a Maori traditional healer. And I think that's really resonated in the last couple of days, from Nicole's talk this morning and from heard in the Indigenous perspectives session just before, about the inherent interconnectivity between the health of people and the health of the planet that's just deeply embedded in Indigenous culture. So this research priority falls into actually how we can make sure that there are mental health benefits to climate action, and also that mental health interventions are appropriate in the context of the climate crisis. And this priority is Indigenous leadership in climate action and mental health interventions, including cultural continuity as a protective factor. So we had lots across these sessions, so I'd urge you to check out the outputs, which I'll link to in a moment. But just some of the other themes that came up were just the compounding nature of hazards and interacting pathways of impact. We know for a long time that if people experience extreme events, that there is trauma and mental health impacts. But now what's happening with the climate crisis is that they're happening faster, and people aren't being able to recover often before the next impact hits. The power of community came through extremely strongly. So the difference often between whether people reported that they could cope or not was about the strength of their social bonds. And it was very clear that in research, we need to be working with and being led by communities. In terms of interventions, we need to be being led by communities, but also that building community is a huge protective factor for mental health and a huge catalyst for climate action. It's really important how research is done and not just what research is done. We need to center lived experience and transdisciplinary approaches. And all of this requires connection, which is what I said was fundamental to the project. And so we needed to create platforms and protocols to share data, methods, and findings and forge collaborations. And so this is what I've done through launching the Global Online Hub. So if we go to the next slide, these are just some stills from the Global Online Hub where you can find all of the outputs, including the agendas, the toolkits for people coming into the space, the lived experience stories, and all of the case studies. So we would love for you to join us. Please check out the hub and please get in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emma, for that overview. Such a rich project, so needed. It's really powerful to hear those lived experience stories directly from people's mouths who have been dealing through and trudging with this difficulty, this trauma, this anxiety. And it can be really affecting for us who receive it as well. So in honoring that, I now just want to invite us to do a brief grounding exercise together because we're going to move through a lot more material today that's also difficult. And it's important to recognize that we are human beings with nervous systems and hearts and bodies, and we should also focus attention on that. So please sit with your feet on the floor, just plant them very firmly. And you're welcome to close your eyes or give them a soft downward focus. Find a position where your upper body is balanced over your hips and your back and shoulders are in a comfortable but alert posture. Notice and enjoy all the places that your body is being supported by the chair and by the floor. Take 3 slow, full breaths, please, at a comfortable pace. Breathing in. Notice your breath filling up your body with oxygen and then emptying it out. Recognize the gentle pull of gravity on your body as you breathe in and breathe out. Feel yourself present in your body, being aware of your head and your neck and your shoulders, your upper and lower torso, your hips, legs, and feet. Now, imagine the soles of your feet sending out roots into the ground, going down through your socks, your shoes, and into the floor. Let these roots stretch down into rich soil, connecting, stabilizing, and grounding you. As you breathe in, imagining vitality entering your body through the soles of your feet. And as you exhale, send down anything that wants to be released into the center of the earth. Keep breathing as you continue focusing on this visualization for just a couple more moments. Remain connected to the feeling of your body and the earth as you reorient yourself to the room around you. And when you're ready, please open your eyes. Thank you for participating. See, some people still haven't opened their eyes. That's perfectly okay. All right, so we're going to now move right along to hear about climate anxiety, what it looks like on the ground in the Philippines. John, please take us away.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John, and I'm an environmental psychologist. I'm also trained as a counseling psychologist. I have a clinic in the Philippines where we provide mental health services to children, young adults, and adolescents with mental health concerns. And in the university, my main area of research is the intersection between climate change and mental health. And I look in this intersection from a global south perspective and from a climate justice perspective. And in this presentation, you'll see the Philippines in the context of climate change, the mental health consequences of the climate crisis, climate action, and I'll touch a little bit on climate justice and how it looks like in the Philippines and in the global south broadly. And we'll share some of the efforts that we do to build communities of practice in climate change and mental health in the Philippines and beyond. I'd like to start by showing you my country, the Philippines. It is constantly ranked as one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. That's in the world, and if you zoom into Southeast Asia, you'll see that the redder the country, the more vulnerable it is to the climate crisis. And unfortunately, the Philippines is the reddest country in Southeast Asia. Every year, we experience at least 20 typhoons. 5 of these typhoons would be super typhoons, devastating people's lives and livelihood and our culture. And on average, a typical Filipino in his or her lifetime would face 1,400 typhoons. And it's also an island country. It has more than 7,000 islands, and we very much feel the reality of sea level rise. And as we speak, we experience in the country extreme heat, ranging from 43 degrees Celsius to 47 degrees Celsius. We expect that to increase in the next coming month. And that leads to unprecedented school closures in the Philippines in recent weeks. Despite that, conversations, policies on climate change and mental health rarely would center on the experiences of the most vulnerable, like people in the Philippines. We know based on data that these natural disasters, climate-related events, are linked with mental health problems, including depression, trauma, anxiety, and many more. And I'd like to focus on climate anxiety, one of the buzzwords today. It's your general worries about climate crisis and the many other different emotions associated with climate change. And this is based on a study published in Lancet Planetary Health, published by Dr. Caroline Hickman, and I believe Britt is here in the study as a co-author. And it found that the Philippines has the most number of young people with moderate to extreme levels of climate anxiety. And while I acknowledge that climate change is associated with many different mental health problems and disorders, climate anxiety in particular is not a psychological disorder. Technically, it's not listed in the DSM-5. It is a normal reaction to climate change because climate change is real. It's already devastating people's lives, killing thousands of people in my country, devastating our livelihood. So it is only normal to feel climate anxious. What worries me is when we don't feel anything about climate change. So while all over the world, people are taking to the streets to engage in climate action, demand responsibility, accountability, as well to governments and the main culprits of climate change, some countries, like the Philippines, it's not easy to engage in climate activism, right? Next slide, please. The Philippines is basically the deadliest country for environment and climate defenders. We have the most number of people murdered in the name of the environment, and this is due to the political and commercial drivers of climate change. And this is something that we truly need to address in the country if we really are committed to addressing climate change, contribute to mitigating and adapting climate change. And so I'll touch a little bit on the issue of climate justice. This is a very complex issue. The definition of climate justice can vary depending on where you are in the discussion of climate change and your experience of climate change. But the one rough definition is who or which country mainly causes climate change and who faces the most severe brunt of climate crisis. Let me touch a little bit the idea of global north and global south. It was mentioned earlier that global north countries highlighted with blue, often these are developed countries, countries that historically and presently extracted fossil fuel, causing greenhouse gas emissions. And often these countries colonize many global south countries. Red countries, you'll see they are global south countries. Often these are developing countries, have very minimal contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, and often they are colonized countries. You'll see data between 1750 to 2020 shows that historically, fossil fuel extraction, greenhouse gas emission are mainly caused by global north countries, of course, with the exemption of China and India that are emerging global economies. Despite the minimal contribution of global south countries like the Philippines, we face the most severe consequences of climate crisis. It's already one decade anniversary of Typhoon Haiyan, the strongest typhoon ever to hit land, killed at least 6,000 people in the Philippines, devastated thousands of families, and it cost us billions of dollars, to recover. And until now, the survivors of Typhoon Haiyan have no proper houses. And when we talk about climate justice, we should also not forget the colonization. The idea of colonizing countries is to extract the resources of colonized countries. And let me show you data in the Philippines that originally before 1521, when we were colonized by Spain, 91% of our land was covered with forest. And you'll see after 333 years of colonization of Spain, 48 years of US colonization, 3 years of Japan, our forest cover declined very quickly, substantially, leaving us with very little resources to defend ourselves from the succeeding natural disasters. And climate justice can also happen within a country. In a country like the Philippines, where the gap between the rich and the poor is just so wide, people from low-income background are forced to reside in communities that are more exposed to elements and climate hazards. Therefore, they're more exposed to health hazards and even mental health hazards of the climate crisis. I'm not the perfect person to talk about gender justice, but I believe this should be mentioned, that climate justice is also gender justice. That when things go bad, females usually would disproportionately face the consequences, of crisis. COVID-19 already gave us a lesson on that. And it is also an intergenerational justice because people today and the next generations who have no contribution to climate change will face the most severe consequences of the climate crisis. And in this landmark case in the Philippines, Attorney Oposa, fresh from law school, sued the Secretary of Department of Environment and Natural Resources of the Philippines to stop the licenses of the timber companies exploiting our forest. And he sued the secretary representing his children, the children of his friends, and the next generations of Filipinos. And the first question of the judge was, can the next generation be represented in court? And then eventually the answer was yes, they can be represented in court. Eventually, Attorney Oposa won, and this case became cited by many countries. So 30 years ago, while many countries are talking about environmental problems, in the Philippines, we're already talking about intergenerational justice. Next slide, please. And I'd like to share some of our efforts to build communities in the Philippines. For instance, recently I established the Sustainability, Psychology, and Planetary Health Research Lab. We call it the Sphere Lab. This is a group of environmentally minded and concerned undergraduate and graduate students who are working on environmental sustainability through a psychological lens. And so if you want to connect with us, we're very happy to engage with you. We are also making sure that while we are working on our research, and advocacy, we want to make sure that we're working directly with communities. This particular example, we work directly with farmers in remote areas in the Philippines. We also work with island dwelling communities in the Philippines who are most exposed to sea level rise to provide climate literacy and mental health literacy training. And we're building a climate change and mental health communities in the Philippines. Of course, this is in partnership with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Renzo Ginto. We build a community of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and cross-sectoral community to imagine the future of climate change and mental health in the Philippines and propose the next actions that we will have to do in the next coming years and decades. We're also part of Emma's Connecting Climate Minds. We're co-leading the Eastern and Southeastern Asia, where we bring together different experts in the region to also co-create the solutions, imagine solutions in climate change and mental health, and identify the research and action agenda to address the emerging nexus of mental health and the climate crisis. And I'd like to thank you for listening to my brief presentation. I'm happy to engage with you, answer questions. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share.
That was excellent, Dr. Aruta. Thank you so much for sharing. I learned a lot. I am so heartened to hear about the leadership in intergenerational justice that is coming out of your country. I feel like we can all take a big page out of that book. Next up, we have something very fresh, very exciting, coming to you straight from people who I'm always grateful for their approach in this space because they bring humor, they bring whimsicality, they bring energy, they bring a creative spirit that defines how Janot and Pablo from the Red Cross, Red Crescent Center approach difficult topics like, in this case, what we're going to hear about today, suicide risk data as it relates to climate change. So please, can we get Pablo up on our Zoom room and Janot, who's here in the flesh? Go for it.
So while Pablo comes in to join us, I'll just explain a little bit that Pablo is going to show you an example of a way of communicating creatively. I could say we are aiming to bring data to life. And he will show a little video so that you can all see. But I have the actual artwork here with me. And we're really privileged that we have the artists also in the room with us today, Eugenia Rojo and Ham Khan, who have been providing a humor reflection, co-creating cartoons with all of you, listening in on sessions and doing Cartoon Anonymous. Anyone who'd like to stop in, have a chat with them after the session, they'll try to bring some of your ideas about mental health and climate to life. And I'd like to ask Ham if maybe you could help me as I will be demonstrating this, I could call it a data artwork, while Pablo talks about it, talks about the genesis. Are we able to bring Pablo into the room?
I am saying hello. Can you hear me?
Great.
Excellent. Thank you, Jano. Thank you, Britt, Emma, everyone. So delighted to be with you. Greetings from Boston. Again, it is about 4:40 in the morning. I have here at home my trusted advisor and mental health supporter, Ippolito, who is illustrating how deeply we can benefit from the grounding activity that we had earlier from Britt. And as mentioned earlier, we have been working from the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center as part of the Connecting Climate Minds to try to help connect what we know from the science on climate and the knowledge and practice of mental health with how we communicate. And one thing is very clear. Research shows that showing research doesn't work. We tend to have our comfort zone, which is publications and graphs and PowerPoints. But when it comes to these very concerning issues of the merging between climate and mental health, we need to explore alternative ways of getting to the feeling part. Seeing is not believing, feeling is believing, and we need to create a new form of resonance. So if technology works with me, let me see if I can push some buttons here. I am going to share with you a few images of what we've been putting together. First, as background, of course, we know that it's going to be harder and harder to stay alive for many, including many who are young today. But there's also the premise that everyone all the time wants to stay alive. And unfortunately, we know that not to be true. So an important disclaimer, although we have done everything we can to be mindful and careful in how we present this information, we're going to be addressing issues of self-harm and suicidality. So if anyone in the room or via Zoom has had lived experience or has any trigger, please be mindful, and discretion is advised. And of course, there are resources for taking this into consideration. I was at a global event where a speaker who is now a dear colleague and friend, Jocelyn Meza, who works on suicide prevention, she was sharing some amazing, strong, compelling stories of how serious the problem is. And then when it came time to show data, this is the slide that came on screen. And I could sense both in myself and in the room that the energy went away. We tend to portray data in a way that is too full, too confusing, and not emotionally resonant. So I'm going to share with you our pop-up book, a very unusual pop-up book that helps us connect to what is going on in a sensorially rich way. Of course, I'm talking from half a planet away, and there's too many of you to get close to the book that Janot with Ham and Eugenia are holding near you. But this hopefully will give you a sense of the contents, and then please feel free to approach Janot, Ham, and or Eugenia. This is in the cover portraying how very often kids especially may be confronting darkness, and it is hard to communicate the need for help. In the very first page, we have what we call artistic evidence that there's always been suffering. Many times, many people throughout history have felt like screaming. But now, if you're connected and if you're sensitive and you're informed, it really feels like screaming more and more. And we have to recognize that in a changing climate, this is pretty much inevitable, and we need to see it coming. Now, with regards to the reality of people taking their own lives, this is, within the pop-up book, a three-dimensional depiction, actually a data sculpture from the CDC, the most trusted source of data about US. And this is 1980 on the left to 2020 on the right. And the bars represent how did suicide rank as a cause of death for different age groups. On the left, ages 0 to 1, then 1 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, all the way to 65 and more. And we see a few things, a few patterns that are quite concerning. First, in 1981, for ages 10 to 14, suicide used to rank 6th, which is already pretty bad. But in the latest period, until 2020, it ranked second cause of death. Kids, adolescents taking their own lives. Even more concerning, the reason why I really couldn't stop entering in full force in trying to communicate these issues, which we're not paying attention to. You may see what appears like a little blip on the bottom. This was for ages 5 to 9. For ages 5 to 9 in the year 2000, suicide made it to the top 10. And unfortunately, we know that this is likely underreported because the medical coroner who is in charge of writing the death certificate very often, especially if there's any ambiguity, any lack of clarity, may report as accidental injury, something that was actually an intentional self-harm. Now, how does this connect to climate? Well, in a changing climate, we know that it's going to become even more acute, the very insufficient access, availability, and quality of mental health care. And as climate hazards become more prominent, they will cast both real and metaphorical shadows on people in need, present and future need. And there will be all sorts of, from physical to institutional to stigmatizing issues that need to be confronted. Now, in terms of the specifics, we have this, let's call it page, to enable conveying many of the things that you already heard from earlier presentations. As the temperature goes up, there's all sorts of things that can happen at the physical level. If there is no food, the cellular constitution of a kid's brain is not going to be different, and that may set the stage for already mental health conditions. And then there's a whole sway that research is showing more and more of how, for example, we heard about suicide correlating to drought in places as diverse as subsistence farming in India or commercial farming in Australia. My colleagues here at Boston University found monotonic mathematical relationship between extreme temperature and gun violence in the US. And we heard about schizophrenia, pre-existing conditions. There's so much that we already know, and there's so much that we need to learn, and especially to learn how to anticipate. Just like in the Red Cross family, when there's a cyclone coming, we take preparedness measures to help with shelter, with water, with food, with safety. We may need to have disaster preparedness mental health brigades that help deal with heat waves, flooding, and many other things. So this is the time for us in the planetary health community to come up with new ideas, to come up with new ways to recognize that the planetary scale, what happens with our Earth and with our life on Earth, will be very dependent on how we shape the access to, understanding of, and action about mental health. This book, of course, ends with, in the beginning, there was a child with a dark cloud and not knowing how to ask for help. Well, can we help reconfigure? Can we help reorganize so that help can be conveyed when it's a need and delivered when it's an offer? This pop-up book was the result of a collaboration among many of us. We're very grateful to all of you. And I'm going to now stop sharing and invite folks in the room to share any additional thoughts. Thank you all, and I'm going to sign off in a few moments. Greetings from Boston, and enjoy all that follows at the Planetary Health Summit. Over.
Thank you so much. So we wanted to share with you a little bit of the genesis and our experience with bringing the arts forward as a way to communicate science, and in particular as a way to bring data stories alive. My colleague, Ham Khan, is going to walk among you so that you can have a more intimate experience of this pop-up book. The video helps to be able to share it with a larger audience, but the intimacy of the experience is also important. We find that when you work with an artist, whether it's a spoken word artist, a musical artist, or a print artist, a graphic artist, it's actually being able to tangibly perceive the hand of that artist, which invokes a kind of a language. You could say that the arts are a universal language, but it invokes a kind of a language in us, which actually opens our brains to a more meaningful receptivity to the underlying message. So when we presented that graph of the CDC data on suicidality by age, I have to say there was a genuinely courageous attempt to color it and to highlight, to bring forward for you, to try to communicate with that data, but it does not have an emotional impact. And we have, unfortunately, I think I could probably say that 99.9% of us in this room are the product of educational systems that systematically teach us to suppress our emotional intelligence. Britt was talking about the full expression of the human being. It's normal to respond to abnormal circumstances emotionally, to feel spiritually wounded. It is also normal to cope and to find courage and to join together and motivate together to do something to change. Emma was talking about turning the vicious cycles into virtuous cycles. To do that, we really need to be drawing on all of our human faculties. So when we intentionally collaborate with artists, even to call them artists is an indicator of the extent to which we have externalized a part of our natural human language. So we intentionally work with artists to find creative ways to communicate science. We don't want science to remain in the domain of scientists. We have to democratize science. We have to find ways of communicating, in particular, mental health in ways that help to remove a lot of the stigma that prevent us from even opening those conversations. It's often a difficult conversation. I think I'm not a practitioner, but I think I can probably assume that your experience would contest that mental health is not the favorite subject of many people. We want to make mental health part of the celebration of human health and planetary health. And using the arts to communicate about mental health is a way to help to change the narrative. And it's a way to enable us to really embrace a fuller kind of an approach to the problems, as well as to imbue the solutions with precisely that wholeness of human intellectual and emotional intelligence that we need to bring to bear. Now, I'd like to share with you before I close one of the things that we learned in producing this pop-up book, collaborating with Jocelyn Meza, who is at the UCLA Heart Lab, and her focus is on youth and suicidality. And in particular, in the United States, we're showing you the CDC data for the United States. She is looking at the differential impacts on youth who are additionally minoritized racially and ethnically. Now, the good news is that her research finds that enabling children and youth to work together, to be part of solutions, essentially to find meaning together, enables them to cope and to heal. And it's very important that we find ways to enable young people. I think the most painful revelation in that data is, as Pablo highlighted, we have the little arrow that lifted to show you the development in a relatively short period of time. We're only talking about over a period of the last few decades, that suicidality in children ages 5 to 9 has moved into the top 10 causes of death. So that is a societal indicator that should make us extremely uncomfortable. We have to be cognizant when we look at a page of data on a graph, the impact that we should be deriving from that data is difficult to achieve. We find that something as simple and beautiful as a pop-up book, which we chose because it's something which is enchanting, mostly to children. I think as adults, we are attracted to the pop-up book because it invokes our childhood, invokes a happier, perhaps more innocent, less or more carefree, less stressful time. But the pop-up book itself is an experience that we share with you. And we hope that this use of the arts will help you to come away with that societal indicator. The fact that it's in the United States does not mean that it is not a similar indicator across all societies. The point being that the stress levels for children are becoming untenable. And that should be something, that should be a discomfort that we all become more comfortable talking about so that we can confront it. And I would really just like to thank my colleagues, the true mental health practitioners, for inviting us. We support you in our work, but Pablo and I are not mental health practitioners, we're humanitarians. And we're grateful for the courage that you have given us and the opportunity to connect these narratives and hopefully to give you some new kinds of tools and approaches that all of you can use to make those connections and to make mental health truly a joyful, collaborative work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janot and Pablo and our wonderful cartoonists here with us today, still showing this amazing pop-up book throughout the room. So, my friends, how are we feeling? That was a lot. Any single emotion someone wants to call out from the audience? What feels resonant right now? It's a bit scary to say, isn't it? Restlessness. Okay, good. Well, that's an invitation to do something interactive then. Thank you, Will. We're going to do one final integration activity here. It's inspired by Joanna Macy's The Work That Reconnects. If anyone's familiar, she's an incredible Buddhist scholar, systems thinker, nourisher of activists around the world, helping us all learn how to use this pain and heartbreak for what's happening in the world as inspiration for change-making, connection, and deeper love. And so I'm going to ask everyone to stand up, please, because we've been sitting a long time listening to some difficult things, and we got to just shake it up. So usually we'd be milling around, but since we're limited by these seats and I don't want anyone to trip on the stairs, I'm going to instead ask you to mill around with your eyes. And that just means look around you into the eyes of your fellow humans in this room, okay? You can literally turn around. We're going to connect with each other. You can give a gentle smile, a nod. And in a moment, at the sound of the bell, you're going to find your person, okay? So you are going to make eye contact with a person who will be with you for this moment, this exercise. Please do pair up with someone. Don't remain in the comfort of being a loner on the edge, okay? So find your person. Does everyone have someone to connect with? If you don't, put up your hand. Anyone not have a friend? Okay, please, we have someone who needs a friend. Here, we have a beautiful docking of connection. Great, okay. Now, we will be silent for this. I forgot to mention that, so please hold back from speaking. We're just gonna be present with one another. Please, no speaking. Not speak. Apologies, I wasn't clear about that. Thank you. So holding your friend's gaze. Now, this person you're looking at is alive on planet Earth at the same time as you, born into the same period of crisis, danger, speed, and injustice. And this person has chosen to be here today. They've chosen to put aside other activities, other tasks, other pleasures, in order to come here to join the rest of us in a time of deep, foreboding strife, to look together at what's happening in our world, forests being clear-cut, corporate exploitation of indigenous lands, the huge threat of climate disruption, species extinctions, incarcerations, and punishments against climate activists, and so much more. Sense your partner's awareness of the terrible injustice, inequality, and pain that surrounds and wounds us all in different ways. This person knows that this is going on, and yet they haven't closed their eyes. They haven't turned away. This person pays attention to all of this. Experience your respect for their courage. Silently acknowledge this, perhaps with a gesture, perhaps with a smile, perhaps with a wink. Now, there's another thing to see in this person's face. Allow your awareness to open up to the real possibility that this person will play a pivotal role in the transformation towards a life-sustaining civilization. They have the gifts, the strengths, the motivation. Allow that possibility to enter your mind and let them know how you feel about it with a smile, a wink, a gesture. And now you can return to your natural position. Thank you so much. Lovely. Oh, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your trust and your openness with each other and with us in that exercise. And with that, we are ready to open the floor to Q&A. Yes. We have someone who'd like to share something. Please do. Here's the microphone.
Hi, I'm Duria from Center for Civilizational Dialogue in University of Malaya. The main thing is that I'm also part of this foundation, a research foundation that gives away money to grants for graduate students mostly. And we give one for lab work, one for something that directly interact with human being. And I'm just so happy to have our decision being confirmed to be right, because way back in 2022, okay, we gave away one grant to somebody from University Malaysia Sabah with the title, her research title is Mental Health in Climate Anxiety Analysis, Response to Extreme Weather Events Due to Climate Change. After we announced that, we got so many questions questioning our decision. Like, why? You could have given it to somebody, you know, whatever, lab work. Normally we do lab work, neuroscience. So neuroscience, you know, normally in the lab work, you talk about memory, you talk about all that. And people were like, do you, like, some has even gone up to her and asked her, do you know these people? Is that why you're getting the grant? So I'm glad because, but for us, the committee at that time, we realized how important it is. And at that time, Malaysia was also just started having these fluctuating things. And we know how important it is as, you know, flood and everything similar to Philippines. And we know how difficult it is, especially in the area away from the cities. So I'm just happy to hear this. And in fact, I was sending slides and, you know, we did it right. We did it right when we gave away this grant to this lady in some.
Oh, delightful. I'm so glad that this panel validated your decision to fund someone pioneering this field. Thank you for funding them. Woo! Now, does anyone out there have a question? Perfect. Oh, that mic is not working. We have others up here we can send down. Thank you, John. One is coming.
So actually, I have a question as I myself as a youth. I do see that the cases are very severe, that actually mental health is very much deteriorating in my peers as well. And especially, I'm not sure for Western context, but this is just for Eastern context. So most of us, we are actually taught from young that we need to like what you mentioned, you need to suppress our emotional side and focus on rationality. And I do think that most youth find it very difficult to explain their emotions or even understand what they're going through as a whole. And even in my organization that I'm working, which is a youth-run NGO, a lot of times it goes unnoticed until you actually notice, hey, this person looks like is behaving off. Only then when you realize something's off, and most often he or she doesn't even realize it. So how might institutions or even government bodies help youth to actually be able to express themselves and actually discover these issues and prevent these things from happening in the first place?
What an important question. Thank you. And I'd like to make sure that others have a chance to respond to this as well. I'll just say that this stigma against our emotional selves, of which we are always made up, that we cannot deny, we cannot truly get away from the emotional and live only in the objective and the rational and so on. This is long lasting. It's all over the world. It's worse in some places than others, but it is highly damaging in that it leads to suppression, conscious and unconsciously, of real and unavoidable emotional impulses that we have from interacting with these complex systems in our world. And we know that that kind of suppression leads to long-term negative mental and physical health impacts. It actually is super taxing. It takes a lot of energy to constantly try to paper things over or shove it under the surface. And so if our stiff upper lip does not maintain and then it eventually breaks and then we feel shameful for having an emotional outburst, then guess what? Here comes the critic that comes to lacerate us and make us feel even worse. Whereas what we know from psychodynamic theory and wisdom traditions is that if we allow ourselves to get curious about the emotions, both comfortable and uncomfortable, that move through us, and get so inquisitive about them that we allow them some space to try and get to know them like guests in our house, that then they actually cycle through us much faster than if we were to suppress them. And that it's the energy used to try and get away from them that makes them stick around and haunt us. But we're afraid that if we let them in, they'll kind of come like a gang of feelings and take over. But that's not what happens, paradoxically. When we let them be there, they move through us much more quickly. And then we can follow their guidance about what we care about most and care to do in the world. So I would say that there's a lot of resource out there. We have on, can you please actually move to the Q&A? Sorry, the last slide there. Perfect. We have some resources here, a variety for opening up, normalizing, helping to create some shifts in cultural norms to take what is usually disenfranchised grief and distress and make it something that we can validate, legitimize, share with one another through peer support programs, through one-off meetings, through even things like climate-aware therapy, which now exists. If you go to unthinkable.earth, there's a resource hub for helping to bring in different practices and supports and hopefully messaging that can help other people get away from that sense of shame. Yes, John.
Thank you, Britt. And I think that's an excellent question. I'd like to answer it as an individual coming from a non-Western background. Also, I'm researching mental health, psychology in general from a non-Western perspective. And I totally agree that many non-Western contexts would prioritize suppressing emotions. It has pros and cons, of course.
Yeah.
And in the context of the Philippines, we have that as well. But what's unique in the Philippines is while we're non-Western, we're also a developing country. It's hard to think of climate change when you don't have food on the table. You know, and what works is when we provide platforms and opportunities for young people to come together and express their experience of climate change and mental health, then they begin to realize that I am not alone, in this experience. There are actually other young people like me who experience the impacts of climate change, who worry about climate change, who want to do something, for the planet. So that might be something that you can explore. How can you create communities of young people where you can freely express those emotions that typically are suppressed? Thank you.
Thank you. I know we're tight on time, but it was an excellent question. So I just wanted to jump in to say, I think, you get at the heart of a lot of what's going on in our societies. I think, as Britt said, it's widespread, but also in the solution to that question, potentially, there's also a synergy between what we need to do to respond as people to, and as institutions and as societies, to the climate crisis, and to preventing mental health challenges. Because sitting with uncomfortable emotions, being able to talk about them, sitting with uncertainty, are key facets of building prevention for good mental health. And we are speaking a lot now, we governments in parts of the world, speaking about the need to equip students with planetary health education, but sustainability education, education around climate change, so that every career can be a climate career into the future. Everyone's going to have to live with a changing climate. But if we do that without embedding emotional and mental well-being skills, and building those skills to be able to talk about emotions in the context of education about the climate crisis, people are not going to be able to continue to study and work in what can be really difficult topics. So there is a real need to integrate climate and mental health education. So yeah, I think that's part of what's going on here too. But yeah, thank you very much for the question.
I could just add maybe a quick positive from the United States context. The American Geophysical Union, in its December annual meeting this year, actually the organizers from the presidency requested a session on climate grief and the importance of this for the American Geophysical Union. 25,000 scientists convening. It's one of the most systematically dispassionate groups of people probably on the planet. But it was to recognize that so many researchers who may be involved in different dimensions of climate themselves are personally struggling with this. As instructors, teachers, professors, they are not at all equipped to recognize or cope with the additional burden of stress that their students are experiencing. So it's an emerging problem on the horizon, but it is beginning to be recognized in a very serious way.
And if anyone's interested in that, I'm giving a plenary tomorrow on stresses that frontline climate and planetary health professionals are experiencing and psychosocial supports for it. So please come. We have time for one more question.
This is not a question. This is just wanted to share the data report. There is Dr. Adnan working with agriculture and particularly working with women farmers in Pakistan. So there is one violence against women crisis center in the region, which is particularly known as the very hot region, where usually the temperature is above 40 degree from April till September. So they published their report. They didn't mention the reason why is that, but there are significant factors which you can easily examine. I just wanted to share, they have received the phone calls, the reported cases for the domestic violence are 1,617 during the summer season, but in the winter they only receive calls and reported cases 365. So from April to September, this is the prime season for the cotton sowing, and more than 67% of the women are involved in agriculture, working for the labor, sowing, cultivation, and from April till May, this is the prime season for wheat harvesting and the mango harvesting season. So data is also very much important for to defend our cases and to make such rehabilitation center. When we talk with the policymakers, they always ask, there is no such problems. You are just civil society people, you are talking, there is no data. But on the basis of such reports and evidence, we can push more pressure on the rehabilitation to make such initiatives for the policymakers. So there is phone call received from the people when we analyze their record, their professions. More than 35% people are farmers, and they are the laborers. So they are actually involved in the direct exposure of extreme heat, temperature above 40 degree every day, and the long sun hours, more than 8 hours every day, and the relative humidity is above 65%. So being a meteorologist, I can understand the situation at that time in the field. So they don't know, but they are actually doing the domestic violence, and they think that, and maybe they have the aggression and they know the female is the soft target to make themselves. So these are the report I'm just presenting.
Thank you. These data would be great to actually import to the Connecting Climate Minds hub. If you see that last year URL there, it's highly relevant for regional stories. Thank you for sharing. Now we have 2 minutes left. So anyone with a burning question, and please make sure it is a question and not a comment. Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. I'm just curious about from like your interviews regarding youth with lived experience. I'm wondering how, if you see any characteristics that kind of like inspire people to kind of like build upon their anger or other emotions to do more like action-oriented coping as opposed to avoidance coping. Because I think I personally struggle with like, oh, I'm so upset about the situation, but I'm so depressed to do anything about it, versus people who are like, I'm so upset about the situation, I'm going to do something to change it. So what are the characteristics?
Well, interestingly, this has been studied. And so there is some evidence to show that externalizing emotions like anger, when faced around the climate and environmental crisis from a source of understanding injustice, that is such a pillar of this problem that we're dealing with, is more constructive in terms of moving people towards action and community building that fosters resilience than, let's say, eco-anxiety or eco-depression. Would anybody else like to weigh in on this?
Yeah, as Britt, I was going to say similar to Britt, but to your point of how could you maybe shift that? There has been some work by people like Joanna Macy and others of how we can move ourselves through an emotional process to a place of taking action, and what that action can look like. And some of the research from Maria Ayala and others is showing that if we can hold meaning and also find hope through taking action, that can be really valuable. So seeing, not kind of waiting to be hopeful to be able to take action, but imagining the future you want to see and being able to join with others. So collective action seems to be more protective. So if you can join with others and take steps towards that future you want to see, that can almost like generate hope, and then that can help you move from that place of kind of overwhelm to action.
I just want to add very quickly, like we need to pay attention to the role of climate education, how we integrate climate change into basic education curriculum. How do we teach climate change and general environmental problems in a way that mobilizes young people rather than paralyzing them emotionally, right? How do we help them realize that they're active agents in this democratic space, that they can actually demand accountability to governments, they can play a very active role, in ensuring that, they can demand that governments and decision makers made the urgent and right decisions for them, that they have voices, So that's one thing that I think is very important.
I think the one thing I would add would be going back to the first comment about gratitude, that putting things into a context and, I mean, we can call it affirmations, but a practice of reflection, meditation, spiritual practice, where you allow yourself to be grateful for whatever it is that you are grateful. It's sort of like letting that spiritual wellspring renew within you, and it can be helpful as a daily practice.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for opening your hearts. Thank you for drinking in all the data, the narratives, the ideas. I hope that we'll remain connected. Please do take a snapshot of all these centers working at the nexus of climate and mental health if it moves you to, and have a fabulous rest of the summit. Thank you.